uncommon lunges with uncommon shoulder to overhead presses. Posterior lunge, shoulder to overhead, behind, shoulder to overhead to the opposite side for our frontal plane load, shoulder to overhead in the transverse plane. So we're really loading up that right butt and hip. The frontal plane, two positions, crossover anteriorly, crossover posteriorly, which is a pivot from the same side, or from the same side frontal plane kind of lunge. Shoulder to overhead uncommon. So lunge overhead, shoulder to overhead press, and I don't mind if that heel comes off the ground, just as long as the left hip stays pointed straight ahead. Rotational press, and now we're going to transition to the posterior crossover, back behind, still in that frontal plane. Transverse plane. And then we have our transverse plane lunge, where we can step, keep the left foot forward, and step even further to get the heel right up off the ground as long as the left foot stays pointed forward. So, I'm going to lunge into it a little bit more. Shoulder to overhead, side to side. And then overhead to the opposite side. Those are our three main uncommon lunges. We had two additives, as you know. Our anterior medial goes into a posterior lateral, sinking down and back, or just lunging down and back. Anterior lateral, we go to posterior medial, lunging deep and far out and back, or just sinking down and into that leg. I'll show you both. So what we'll do, we're going to sink kind of posterior lateral down into that leg. Shoulder overhead behind us. Shoulder to overhead, opposite direction, shoulder to overhead, crossing the midline of the body. We'll then go posterior lateral, shoulder to overhead, and then we'll go rotational plane with it, and then we're going to go posterior medial, uncommon shoulder to overhead presses. And then overhead to the opposite side. And then overhead to the opposite side. With the rotation, and then we're going to widen it up a little bit, go for distance a little more. Shoulder to overhead, behind us, shoulder to overhead, the opposite side, shoulder to overhead, crossing over the midline. Uncommon lunges with uncommon shoulder